no, I was going to say last semester, but this semester seems like a long time ago. Several of us got together to share a module which was called Followership. And in that class was a woman by the name of Geraldine Umu Gwaneza, I hope I got the last name correct, who talked to us very briefly, woefully briefly, about the role of the follower in the Rwandan genocide. Now, it's impossible there is no overestimating the importance of this topic. We could talk from now till doomsday. It is, usually when there's a genocide, we do what we normally do, which is to look to the top for explanations. How did this start? And what is the role that the different leaders played? But what is so incredibly underappreciated is the role played by the so-called followers, by those who do the actual killing in almost every circumstance. Genocides are about killing. They're massacres, they're murders. So the question of how this transpires and how people can be motivated to hack each other to death, often neighbors who were previously lived with in complete harmony, remains an elusive riddle that we grapple with great inefficiency and ineffectualness. So when Geraldine was willing to talk about this, we were the fortunate ones, and it was understood as we closed the course that if she was willing to talk further about this in the future, there were several of us that would be deeply appreciative. Your colleague, Dana Savaroy, has been kind enough to organize this. She essentially is the one who brought this together, but it is Geraldine to whom we owe a great debt for her being willing to, as I said, talk about it in somewhat further detail. Samir Randolph, my colleague at the Center for Public Leadership, will be taping this event with the exception of some moments in the proceedings at which, as I understand it, Geraldine will ask him to turn the tape off, and those comments will be entirely off the record. So with deep gratitude, Geraldine, I'm turning it over to you. Thank you very much.
I will stand, then I will stand and I will sit and we will do both. Well, first of all, I apologize for being late a few minutes. We had I'm kind of stressed. I have a lot of things like you guys. But it's my pleasure for me to talk to you about my personal experience in the context of Rwandan genocide, and also tell you about how I look at Rwandans as ordinary, like how I look at Rwandans as followers, how I kind of shifted the blame from leaders to ordinary Rwandans. And you'll bear with me. I've never had, for all these 12 years, I've never had a problem talking about my story. So whenever you ask me about my story, I straight away talk about my story. I don't cry, I don't become like so deep emotional, so deep emotional. But today, this morning with Samir, I think I realized there was a difference. So you bear with me where things don't go as you expect. And so I start telling you about my personal experience, and then I will ask him to show you something I want you to actually see. I grew up in Uganda. My parents, I come in Rwanda. We have, in some places, I actually write you. So. That's great. So in Rwanda I'm used to teaching the grassroots, and there's no way I can teach them, but you're not a grassroots in this case, you're still in the school. So we have people called Hutu, and then you have Tutsi, and then you have Twa. These are like 1 to 2%. And this is a minority group between 14 to 15%, and then this is more than 80%. So in Rwanda, I do come from this group. And this group has been in power, it was in power before 1959. And then we had colonizers coming in. I won't go deep into the history because there are more important things I want to talk about to you about other than colonialism. And so I will rush through it. So the colonizers came in and they made us construct our history and our identities. So there is a lot that goes with the physical identities of these people. Personally, like the how they look like. If I am in Rwanda, sometimes I can tell with the Tutsi and sometimes I cannot. We've had intermarriages in a few cases. And I do believe through God's creation, people can look alike, even if they're not necessarily the same. And so from 1959, we had this majority group. Through the force of the colonizers, we had a revolution and they toppled the Tutsi group. So the Tutsi group lost power to the Hutu group. And so from 1959 through 1973, this group was free in this country because whenever there was a problem, the Tutsis would always be the scapegoats and they would always be massacred. So my parents, 1973, they had shortly married, and they left Rwanda for Uganda because then we had a coup, and then they also all that was blamed again on the Tutsi, and so they left this country because they were afraid of being killed. So my mother woke up one morning, and she arranged her house, put everything in order, and pretended as if she's around, and then asked my father. Told my father that they were ready to leave. So such that when the neighbors come into our house, they actually think we're around. But my parents left at this time. So they went to Uganda through that time. So as a child, as far as I can remember, at age 9, age 10, I remember myself growing up in a refugee camp. So when I grew up, as I was growing up, I found myself in a refugee camp. Does any of you know what a refugee camp looks like? You've never even seen it on a movie? So I've been talking to high school students and they ask me, what does it look like? So I have a picture of a refugee camp for displaced people here in the Sudan. But this is typical, exactly the way our own was. So have a look at this. This is the kind of house I grew up in until I was 12. So look at it and you will get an idea of my early childhood. So in this kind of environment, you have no medicine. When you're sick, you just live on herbs. I was telling a colleague a few minutes ago that in this particular, until I was 12, I had never brushed my teeth with Colgate. So whenever I brush my teeth, I would just pick a piece of branch and clean. But people tell me I have very good teeth, so I don't. So until that's where I grew up, and until 1983, my uncle who was in Rwanda, I had two uncles in Rwanda, they sent a message to my dad and told him, well, the Hutus, there is always insecurity, but they won't kill us, so just get your family out of that place. So my dad had gone to the capital city camp in Uganda to look for a job, and he was actually working there. That's how at least I had one pair of shoes to wear on Christmas. So you can imagine Monday through Sunday you have no shoes until Christmas. So that's how I lived, and then my dad decided that he should take his family actually back to Rwanda. So from 1973, we went back to Rwanda in 1984. So that's 11 years in a refugee camp. In 1984, I was in primary 4. I think that's like elementary school, right? So I was in primary 4, and because I had because I was living, then that refugee camp was in a place called Imara in the western part of Uganda. And so my dad took us, because we had now moved to Rwanda, he shifted us, he took us to another school in the southwestern part of Uganda. And we were 6. At the time of 1984, we were 4 kids, and so he took the 4 kids, he took the 2 kids, and then my sister and I am the first. He left us in Uganda because he said, well, you cannot go and study in the French system, it's so complicated, you're already in an Anglophone system, so keep in Uganda. That's how I kept in Uganda. So from 1984, I was in a boarding school with my sister, and then I would go for holidays to Rwanda. In 1990, that's after 6 years, 1990, my dad, he got sick and he died, and he was like maybe 38 or 39. So he got sick and he died. I was the first child. He died in Kenya, and I was in Uganda, and the family was in Rwanda. But he had kind of pampered me. He had spoiled me a lot. I grew up in a very poor environment, as you can see. But what I know about around me is love, is joy. So I grew up in a very, very loving environment, such that I could not even think there was anything beyond what was around me. And so when he died, it affected me. But I tried to recover from it, and then that time I was in senior 3. And after we buried him, that was 14th September, I went back to school with my sister. And on 1st October, the same year, we had the war starting. So we had rebels, the Rwandan, the Tutsi rebels, the RPF rebels, who were dominantly Tutsi people. They waged the war against the then government, the Rwandan government. And so from 1990, my sister and I could not travel to Rwanda. So we were cut off from this family, from my mother, 2 sisters, and 2 brothers. And we never communicated until 1991, and we would only communicate. I would send a letter to my mom through England. So I would send a letter to a friend in England. They would then send it to Rwanda. So my mother could always read from me as if I'm based in England. She never knew until like after some time. And in 1990, I was threatened with death because Rwanda sent spies into the southern part of Uganda. And they were looking for Rwandan students to like they were saying, no, it's safe home, come, you're studying here. So I refused. They threatened to shoot me. That time, I had never been stubborn, but that day I was really, really stubborn. So I actually lied. I was a very, very committed Christian. I never used to lie. That day I really lied. So they asked me, so who is your dad? Like they told me, your dad is actually calling, no. They said, who is your dad? And then I said, my dad is, he's so and so. And then they said, he's actually calling you home, and I had buried him like a year before. So they were using all kinds of tricks without even having a lot of information about us. And so I said, well, first of all, yes, I'm a Ugandan. My mother is a Rwandese, so I use this word like a bastard. So I was born out of my dad just had me with this Rwandan woman. Sometimes I even go and visit. I don't even have a lot in common with her. She was my mother, but so I could survive. So I will go back into this if you ask me questions. But 1994. 17th March, I was done with high school. So when we lost touch with our family, we did not have many relatives in Uganda, but a friend of my dad who knew where I was, and my sister, he sent message, and so he took care of us. And so, again in this family, I found love. I was so, again, spoiled. So God has been so graceful, so gracious to me. I'll say this because this is what I believe. Even amidst all my troubles, I've found people loving to me. I've never had people giving me trouble. So all this has actually made me who I am and has pushed me on and on and on. And so in the same year, 1994, 7th April, I was at home. I knew that genocide had started, but I didn't know the fate of my family. So on 7th April, they got my brother, who was like 15 years old, and then another guy, they burnt them alive. And then they got my mother, her mother, 20 other women. They locked them in a place, like most other people. And then they could feed them. Sometimes they could come and threaten them, and they died around maybe 22nd. I'm yet to confirm these dates. So I never knew that they died until July, like 3 months later. And I never knew, I heard rumors of who killed them, but I never knew exactly who and what it meant. So until 11th April 2004, 11 years later, did I actually meet the killers of my family, see their remains. To you, what that means, you see a lot of things, you see skeletons, you see a lot of things. You don't understand what that means. But this is a story I have in my heart, and I'm going to share it with you right now. So I'm going to ask Samir to turn on something. It's a big, let me tell you like how it happened. When they called me, the president of the Survivors Association in Rwanda, in my community, called me and she said, this is on Easter 2004, 11th April, and she says, well, do you actually know we are digging up the remains of your mother, your grandmother, and 20 other women? And I said, what? My mother was a young woman, and I had seen people burying their remains, but I wasn't ready to actually see these things, like my mother's a skeleton, young and energetic, just smelling skeleton. So it took us like a whole week to actually dig up the remains. So I asked someone to go with me to where they had killed them and actually videotape all these things so that I can actually have something I can talk about in the future. We as victims, we do have an obligation to talk about what other people went through and what we went through. There are those people who are dead, the 6 million Jews, all these other people who have been victims of genocide and other crimes against humanity. We'll never come back to talk about what they went through. The orphans and the widows who are just traumatized and who have no audience will never have the time to talk about this. So it is us and the friends of survivors and whoever feels really this is an issue to talk about, to tell these stories. So it's so hard for me to show you what I'm going to show you. To show you members of my family, my mother, my sister, as a skeleton. Not as a human being talking to you, but as a dead person. But for the purposes of sharing knowledge, sharing experience, as human beings, you need to take this story with you. So would you please help me turn it on? So it's actually in my language. I brought it to not, but I will try to show you. It's a long one. I'll show you only 3 scenes. I'll show you a scene where I meet the killers. So like here they are talking about the burying of the remains of my people. It's just something that is open. So they say they died in the genocide in 1994 in April. So I'll show you only 3 scenes where they dig out the remains of my sister, where I meet the killers, where my mother was buried alive with 20 other women, and then how, when we talk about remains, what it looks like, and what we as victims of genocide actually carry in our hearts. So that is my sister, like these are the names of myself, my sister, and then my mother, all the people who died. Can you see? So that was my car. I had gone to this place to see what was happening. That was my moment. These were people who had gone with me. They mobilized the whole village to help me work with them. She's gone actually. So this is my auntie. Oh, she's gone. She lost her 6 kids, her husband. She's just by herself. So they're now taking us to a place where they actually buried my sister. She was the last one, 8 years old. So they would take them to deep in places so we would never ever trace their remains. So that is me. This guy, my mother, maybe you could stop and I talk about this guy.
Yeah.
What happened is that my mother and 21 other women, that includes her mother, they were buried alive. So it's like 20 of us here, together in a pit latrine. So I'm going to show you where they buried them. So my mother was actually the person forced to jump in alive. So when she jumped in alive, because they were not eating and they had really died even before they were killed. So at that time she was maybe my size, or she was a bit slimmer than me. And so she jumped in. That guy who has a red jacket, she was in Belgium. His mother was she was big in body. She jumped in second. So my mother cried and said, I think, I'm told, she kind of groaned as if they had broken her back because someone jumps on her and then jumps on actually her back. So she kind of groaned and cried like there's a way she cried. And so the mother of this guy says, don't cry. it's on time, and this is what is actually, like this is what is going to happen. So this guy is actually someone who lost his family when he was away. So he learns about the same story at the time I learned about my story. So. So this is I live in that community, like where they killed my. So this guy you see him a lot in film. Maybe you could pause it. This guy, okay, this guy, his son married my cousin's sister. So they are Hutu. He married my cousin's sister. And then he's the one, they killed my young sister. So my young sister actually is killed in his yard. And he's so arrogant that he took us like 3 days not wanting to tell us what happened. So he still has this a lot of anger. He feels like genocide was never accomplished as it was planned. So this is someone who actually knew where my family was, everyone, he knew everyone. So you see his son, and this is one of the killers, and you're going to see me talking to him. You can just keep preparing. One thing I should tell you is that I made sure, that is my sister, she just passed there. One thing I should tell you is that I felt as a victim meeting my killers of my family. I would never, never, never shed tears before these killers. Never shed tears before these killers. I made sure that I just talk calmly, because I never wanted them to celebrate. They had taken so many years without seeing me. They had seen me as a kid. So the time I met them, they had actually killed my family. And I had been in positions of leadership. I was talking about justice, reconciliation, human rights, respect to whatever, on national TV, national radio. So to see me as someone coming to this village and crying and roaring before these perpetrators is something I had sworn never to do. So it needed a lot of courage to actually go to this place. So you can maybe forward it and I'll show you where you stop. It's a long one. It's a long story. But
do you want to go to the next scene?
No, we haven't seen where this kid. So go ahead, I'll show you. It's unfortunate we don't have time, but I'm sure you'd have wanted to hear all these things that, you know. I brought the 2 tapes. It was actually on 2 tapes, but they could not be played on your video or on your screens or whatever. Like the system can't work together. So Harvard had to do this for me, to put it together and then adjust it to your own system, so I can win it. Okay, there. So you can just pause it here. I need to see this scene here. So this is me. This is my sister. She's a lawyer like myself. She's now working at International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. So at this place, okay. So you can see like all these white things. Can you see like they look like pieces of old wood? They look like that. The scene that is before this is that these killers, because the community says you actually killed these people, they accept they killed my sister, she was 8 years old. So they killed her. They said, well, first of all, we've killed everyone in this family. But this kid has got 2 sisters. Maybe they're in an RPF in this fighting rebel group. Maybe she will tell this story. She's old enough to talk about this. So they destroyed, like they killed her with matches and then destroyed like her skull. And so they let her like on the ground or in the yard, and so dogs come and they start eating her, and birds. So, and then they eat away everything apart from a few ribs, and then a few of her thighs, and then like it's a few bones. And she was wearing, at this time she was wearing a white vest and a skirt my dad had bought a skirt, like we were young, so used to, like we were four girls used to buy like same clothing. So he had bought, in 1989, my dad had bought a skirt for me that resembled hers, like looked like hers. So when the dogs, after they've had their feast, her small thighs actually keep hanging in her pant and her skirt. So the killer, the other guy who is in a blue t-shirt, he actually says, no, she's going to be smelling here. This means, why don't we take, the mess in the trench? So all these are like her thighs, her elbows, this is her. So because they put her in a trench, when you put a dead body in a trench, she's not in a casket, she's just like a few bones and some flesh thrown in a trench. With a lot of water coming into this trench, she decomposes and becomes like kind of ashes. So this is my sister, so you can play. So you can imagine, this is after 6 years when I was home. This is an 8-year-old kid, she looked exactly like me, and she refused always to be called by her names. She wanted to be called my name. Everyone knew I looked like her, everything. So so that's me, I'm asking this killer. So this is her. So this is the whole human being, this is her skirt, this is her skirt, this is like her pant. This is the whole human being, 8-year-old. So when I talk about the stories that victims they carry their hearts, this is what we have in our hearts. So people come from here, the West, everywhere, they make films, this is genocide, but this is what we have. So that's my sister. So maybe we could hurry up because...
You want to go to the next?
Yes, yes. So what I'm going to show you, it's a long story. What I'm going to show you next is a pit latrine that was dug, and my mother and her mother and 20 other women were thrown in. So it was like a narrow, deep pit latrine. And I hadn't seen this film, by the way. I was doing this and someone was taping it, but I never saw how it was made until today. No, the other time we saw it, but I didn't see some things at the Mason table. This is the other killer. He's telling us he didn't do it. It is some militias who came. So, like as always, they deny all these things. But I want to show you the whole.
Yeah.
Yes. Is it on this one? Okay. Sorry. Okay. Here. So this is actually, it's so deep. It is so narrow and it is so deep. So you can imagine this one, 22 women. So I cannot tell you what, just go on and I'll show you. And yeah, this is the killer telling us. And so we are standing at this hall and we're asking them, like, so how did they move from this a certain distance and then they are walked in like cows or like sheep or like goats heading for the slaughterhouse? So this is all I'm asking him. And he's saying, actually it is some other people, it's not us, like of course you would expect. So this is his son. He's just that is his son who married my cousin's sister. So let's go.
To the next scene.
Maybe the other one, do not videotape it. Are you taping this?
It is. I can turn it up.
So the other one, actually maybe this one I had it asking my sister. I don't know whether she would like me to do this, but even I will ask her. If she says we should not, maybe we ask somebody to cut it. If she accepts, I'm very willing to share. This is something that I feel is not my own, but it is for entire human. This is my story. That is what I have in my heart. Thank you. That's what I have in my heart. That is what I have in my mind. Why I say I'm a bit lucky, much more lucky, is that I have my life and I have my sister. Thank you. Because most survivors did not have anyone left, so I have my sister who can talk. I'm one of the very few orphans that have been able to go to school up to this level. Everyone asks me, so how did you make it to Harvard from that village you saw? From this thing, and then to Harvard. So it's a long story. So most victims were raped and were HIV positive. Others lost everyone, they lost everything. They are just so traumatized. They have no shelter, they have no medication, they have no food. they're just there waiting for their death. So even when Monday through Friday, Monday through Sunday, January 1st through December 31st, I'm always happy. And I have a reason to be happy. And what moves on, I've had my family background, the way I was brought up. And I became a Christian when I was at a young age, so my faith also, when all this came, I was like a staunch Christian. So there's a lot that has made me move on beyond this. So whenever you ask questions, I'll go back to that. So this is my story. In the context of Rwandan genocide, what everyone experienced, I'm looking at my shift. I shift the blame from the one. Okay, I do blame leadership. But a part about ordinary Rwandans, you could see these are people who had intermarried. These are people who are neighbors who took people from their families, their homes, and took them to these places to kill them. These are people who knew us. These are people we had intermarried. These are people we had had kids together. One of the killers actually, at age, I had just become 15. He asked me to marry me. I was in high school. And said, that time I was young and shy, I could not even stand before a boy. So I couldn't even look at a boy, I could maybe do like that. Because I was even shy, I couldn't talk to the boy. So my mom had refused to marry his father. And now he comes to talk to me about marriage, which I never told my mother about because I could never talk about marriage at that age. So he's one of the people who said, oh, she refused us. Oh, so the father actually refused the mother refused my father. So he perpetrated genocide. So in the context of our followership class, as ordinary citizens, when the states or the leadership asks us to do something, what makes us do it? In the context of Rwandan genocide, why did the people do, like what motivated them? Some people say it's because of hatred. So we had hatred. But again, we had intermarried. So these are people, we had kids together, we lived together. Some people say it's because, there's an author called Christopher Browning. He's written a book about this whole genocide and then the Holocaust. For him, he generally takes a situationist approach. It means the situation you are in forces you, makes you act the way you act. So in the context of Rwandan genociders or perpetrators, because they were poor, because they wanted the property, so they decided to kill. Then there is another author who is called David Goldhagen. For him, he takes an intentionist approach. In other words, even when you're in such a situation, it's your intention to do something that drives you. So in the context of our ordinary citizens, the Rwandan citizens, it's not only about leadership. It's about them as a people. It's about, we never had Rwandans, actually, there are very, very, very few Rwandans among this population, the Hutu population, who said no to genocide. So everyone was willing to actually go and perpetrate genocide and kill their neighbors. Some people say they wanted to take the property of the Tutsi. But I saw some, as you saw, like, for example, in these villages, if your neighbor was a Tutsi, he was not wearing shoes like you were not wearing shoes. He never had a house, like a good house like you do not. So if you killed him, there is nothing you could even benefit. So it's not even about property, because people had no property. Rwanda is a very, very poor country. So even if you killed someone, there's nothing you could take, not even a hen that we keep in our homes, not even a goat that we keep in our homes, not even a clothing because people were dressed in it. You saw them. So I do think that in my own understanding, it is the willingness of our ordinary citizens that actually made the genocide be committed to the extent it did. The state had its role, it planned, it started it, but we as citizens, the citizens in Rwanda never said no to evil. They never said no. A few of them did, but they never. At present, there is a lot that is going on about this genocide. Like there is a lot that is going on about the Holocaust. There is a lot of denial going on. A lot of denial. People are saying it's not a genocide. So we have a lot from the West, among these colonizers, the colonialists, and they're investing a lot of people, a lot of money into this majority Hutu people to say it wasn't a genocide. It was just, crimes. It was, we killed them. A few of them, like these rebel militias who were dominant in Tutsis, they killed us. So it was actually killings. So there is a lot of denial that is going on. That is something called revisionism or revisionist. So there is a lot that is being done every day. People are writing, every day people are publishing about the fact that there was no genocide in Rwanda. There was no Holocaust. There is David Irving. Is it Irving? David Irving.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot of people. People are involved in research. I was in a class last semester, and there were students who are writing this, and I conflicted one of the professors. I will not tell you where he's from. I will tell you a few people of you. He even gave me like a bad grade because I was insisting that I was connecting genocide against Jews with the Rwandan genocide. So for him, it's what is genocide? How can you classify genocide? So there is a lot that scholars are doing to justify the position of these situationists or these people that are denying genocide. So we as victims, we as researchers, I do charge you as a generation to actually go into this research. Why should you just accept what I'm telling you today, what to just read? Why don't you take an initiative to actually carry out research? You're going to be leaders. So I don't know to what level you are going to work with these ordinary people in your own communities, but you as a generation, if you don't do something about this case, soon we are going to have another Darfur. We are now having another Rwanda in Darfur, but soon we'll have another Darfur in Africa, and then another Chad, and then another Sierra Leone, and then another. So you as a generation, if we don't do something about it, history will judge us. Don't you think history will judge us as a generation? We are powerless maybe because we're not in these high positions of leadership. But you have a say, you can talk about this. You have a say, you can actually advocate for something. You might never ever do much, but I think there's something that you can do. So it's so unfortunate, like we have 10 minutes or 15 minutes. It's so much that I wanted to go into the details of this followership, but then my story took much time. I think let me try to answer your questions in the context of the followership class we took. So you can ask me questions and then I answer questions so that we can share time, so that we can actually learn from this experience in the context of a followership class. I don't know what you think. What do you think? I know you're traumatized, but it's hard. It's hard, I know it's, some people never want to see this, but you as a generation like myself, you have to carry this in your hearts. And then you can actually connect with me, and it was not easy for me to decide to show you this. I haven't shown it to another class. I tried it with my other class, but I never showed that scene where we are digging out like my mother and these other people.
I think we're blessed that you did.
Geraldine, how do you face, I mean, for me it's also interesting watching you all standing there with people that did such horrible things to your family members and to your neighbors.
How do I face that?
How do you manage that? I mean, for me, I can't imagine what it's like to be in that situation, but I would be so angry that I would maybe want to commit acts of violence against them in anger of what they did. And so how do you manage that as a person, and how do you want to manage that as a people?
I'll give an example of two people. There is me and there is my sister, victims of same crime, same perpetrator, same everything. But she still has a lot of trauma. She's the second born. And for the last 11 years, for 11 years after the genocide, I never used to cry. So each time I would think about it, it would be too heavy for me to cry. Too heavy to cry. I would wish I could share the tears could not come. But that would not mean I don't have the pain. And so research has shown that when all these things happen, like when you're a big person, when you are aware of what is happening, trauma is like trauma accumulates in you with time. And then after many years, like 10, 15 years, you break down. So that's why like today I start crying like an old woman, you know, whenever they talk about this I cry. Today I was crying when I was showing Samir. I'm so happy that I did not cry. And I never cried, I only cried this week when we were digging out the remains. So my sister, some of the killers actually sent message to us and they said that they wanted to meet us. My sister said no. And I said I want to meet these killers, I want to learn from them, you know, first-hand information, if I can be able to get information. So my sister said she doesn't want to see the killers. She doesn't want to see anyone that is related to this. These are two people that are sisters. But then, even if we are victims, we are very, very different people. And so with me, I decided, well, I have to meet them. But she insisted she will not. So for purposes of not hurting my sister, I never went to meet the killers. So she kept like that, and then until 11 years, when she's not prepared to go through this, they give us a phone call. After 11 years, she was not prepared. She always wished to know, but she had no courage to face this. So a day comes when we are meant to face this. So we dig out these remains. Normally people, like here you have a modern system, so when someone dies, it's in a hospital, you keep this, you know, in a mortuary. You don't even touch or see these people. So for us now, we are touching, we are digging out, we keep this. I was renting a house, so we keep all this at my place. Like that small box to my sister. We took this box to my sister, to my room, and my sister was saying, you know what, like I hear like ghosts, like, you know, people when they are dying, like when they, so there are stories about dead people. So even if she's our sister, she's this, you know, these small pieces of bone. She has the fear, my sister had the fear to keep this. But we had no person, like an old person to keep around us, to, you know, to encourage. It was me to say, let's do this. It was me. So there's so many things that have given me the courage, I think. One, first of all, there's a superior power I never know where it comes from in me. That's why I say at a certain level I think it's God that, you know, he knows we go through this, so he gives us the courage. Secondly, being a first child in a family, and then, you know, another victim is my young sister. I always feel I have a responsibility to be older, to stand strong when she's weak, to help her walking through life when she cannot, to encourage her when she's, you know, she's lost hope, to wipe her tears and, you know, hold mine so I can actually talk to her. So my life as a first child, and also, as I told you, I had my faith when I was young. I cannot even tell you that I've been able to ask to forgive these people even before they never approached me. But I've been able to forgive these people. My sister has not. She still struggles with forgiveness. But I say, I'm not going to be as bad as these people. If there is heaven and hell, I'm not going to hell with these people. They still want to do genocide. So the fact that these people are evil should not make me lose my own humanity. So there is a way I was brought up. There is a way I feel I'm a human being. There is a way I feel I should have a good heart. There is a way I feel I should love the unloved. There is a way I feel I should forgive those who are not even worth forgiving. So for the purposes of keeping my own goodness as a human being, I try to keep away from, you know, hate and feelings of revenge. You can imagine, all these years, I've not had a feeling like, I wish they could die and I could kill them. I wish I had justice. I was a judge and I was a lawyer and I had the power to actually, you know, tell someone and hire someone. First of all, we had to shoot all these dogs. And then I would kill myself. I had the power. When you want to do something, you do it. But I cannot be like them. So at some level I can explain, at another level I cannot say what gives me the courage to face this kind of sin. Any other question? Yes.
First of all, thank you so much for talking to us. I mean, I heard your story in Followership, and you're an incredibly amazing person, and I feel like very fortunate to have heard your story. My question is, I mean, it seems to me that you're all still living in some capacity in the same community, and how do you trust these people that have committed such crimes against you, and, you know, what do you think of that, and how do you...
I live in a different place from where we used to live, and I do not trust them, and I always fear for my life. To these people, they wish they could have killed us. And it's not that because they are Hutu and then we are Tutsi that they are suspicious of us. It's that we are victims. So victims are having stories to tell. So victims are always enemies, or survivors are always enemies of perpetrators. So they feel, if actually there's someone who said, if you could kill all the victims in Rwanda, a chapter would be closed that would not have anyone pointing and accusing finger again, like to us. So I never trust these people. I cannot go and meet them alone in there where I had the police. I know anytime they can grab and take away my neck. So I try to distance myself from these people. So I never feel safe. I never, try to get in touch, even with their relatives, not anyone. I try to keep at a distance. So I always feel in fear. And especially because I'm a lawyer and I work with justice and my sister is working at the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda that is also prosecuting these perpetrators. Also because of our profession or whatever, our careers, we are also at risk. She was a prosecutor and I was a judge, and with prosecutors you have to go. She was investigating in all these things. So they even know, she knows how to make a file, to compose a file. She knows how she can take a case to court. Mm-hmm. So I never trusted it. And I always fear for my life and my sister's life.
We have time for one more question.
Yes.
In terms of reconciliation and coming together, I know there's been this National Unity and Reconciliation Commission, and the passports no longer have the name, the ethnic identities and things like that. But are there other things? How are those things working? And are there other things that are helping to bring people together that's going on?
Okay, in terms of reconciliation and forgiveness, before I can say something about that, I would say that genocide is something you never, ever get over. So it is hard even for a victim to, it's a journey. Forgiveness and reconciliation, they are journeys. So you are walking towards the reconciliation, forgiveness. And this journey is a journey where you're starting from the victimhood, from a genocide. So you are not a victim of a hate crime, of someone, of just a crime. You are a victim of genocide. So you will, first of all, at this stage as a victim, you will never get over it. Unless by God's grace as me, I can talk and I can laugh and I can be a human being and read and pass my exam, semester to another degree. Most people have dropped out of school because of trauma. So I'm one of the very few that have gone beyond this. That trauma has not caught me and thrown me down. So people, it's not easy to start this journey. Victims may never ever start this journey towards this reconciliation or forgiveness. They may never ever. For you to be able to take this journey, it might depend on the level of victimization. Some people were Tutsis, but they lost like a distant relative. So you have your father, your mother, and sisters and brothers. So you are still a victim, you are still a survivor, but you have a family around you. So you can actually start talking about this. Some people, if you are at this stage, you don't have anyone around you, you've lost everything, you would not easily talk about this. But the government will talk about this because you have, perpetrators like integration, all these things. So there is the politics of reconciliation. But as individuals, as a society, we can move towards this. Like the politics, the leaders, there is a way reconciliation becomes easier at the top. In South Africa, in Rwanda, in Argentina, everywhere, wherever they talk about justice and reconciliation. But on an individual level, most people have not started this journey. And possibly me, I have taken it up to this level. Not here, but here. I don't need to reconcile, but I need possibly to forgive. You might know, you don't need to reconcile. You don't need to walk to a person and shake hands and actually, I don't know what you would say. You can forgive, but you might not want to to reconcile. So the way in Rwanda it is working, most people have not taken this journey. They are still in this false circle. They are still struggling here. They've not started taking this journey. So there is what is happening at the top in terms of leadership, in terms of politics. Some people, a few people have forgiven, a few people have reconciled, but because of the conditions of the victims, and because of the unwillingness of these perpetrators, who actually do not feel repentant, who do not feel sorry, you cannot just forgive someone, it's unusual. So people have not been able to start that journey.
Can I just make one quick comment?
The unwillingness to apologize, to acknowledge is incredibly important, I think, for the question that you're asking. As a postscript, in South Africa, these efforts at reconciliation were known, as you all know, as the Truth and Reconciliation effort. In Eastern Europe, it had a different name, which is probably a better name, and there it's called Knowledge and Acknowledgement, which doesn't ask for forgiveness and reconciliation. The bar is set much lower and is probably much more realistic. But I happen to have studied, even since we met Geraldine, the role of the apology, that is the acknowledgement in making possible some kind of reconciliation, however reconciliation is defined. And it's incredibly important, and without that acknowledgement of having done wrong, it is really difficult to take what you allude to as a journey.
And
really difficult.
And one other thing I should tell you is that one other thing that we as victims ask ourselves, we as survivors, who has the power to forgive on behalf of a victim? In other words, I could have forgiven, but possibly my mother would never have ever liked to forgive these people. So do I have the power to forgive on behalf of these victims? I don't know what they could say should they hear, I actually forgave these people. So we do not have the power to forgive on behalf of these others. It's a personal journey. It's not a family journey. It's not a sister, it's not something like a movie, it's not a class, it's not a family, it's a personal journey. That's why my sister is still struggling in there. And being a prosecutor, being investigating, talking to survivors, talking to perpetrators every day. I used to talk to perpetrators. It took me time to move out of from that place. So Susan, maybe we can have Susan maybe and then we go. And I would promise, I think what we can do with Professor Barbara Kelman and Samir, we can have Samir ask you questions, like in an interview, we'll incorporate into this video taping so we can find certain issues, then they can say it another time, those of you will be here another semester. So I'll work with him and make sure it is something that we talk much about this story. And another thing, maybe I'll give, you can read my paper, but I'll make sure I answer some questions. So you can even send questions to Samir, and then I will give him an answer.
Maybe we can just read your paper again yesterday, and I think that people here.
I can even talk about it.
So maybe we can send out the paper to everyone, and then people can send feedback or reflections and to thank you.
And they can interview me and I can answer questions and you can listen next semester. So Susan maybe and then we hurry up. Maybe.
Okay, so I apologize for keeping
It's
people
okay.
here. But I was curious because you've been thinking about this from a followership perspective. I wonder if you look at it as an individualist phenomenon, each person making a decision, or if it's more of a group dynamic to go along with the flow of this behavior. And associated with that, I'm wondering what you learned from the people who didn't follow,
Okay,
who
it's
resisted this.
we as a society, first of all, we deal with perpetrators as individual criminals, right? As people who committed crimes individually. But I'm saying we as a people, we as ordinary citizens, there is a way you do something, feeling you're an individual doing something. But remember, there is a call from the state which are standing in the name of these two people. These are enemies, they are cockroaches, they have the ABCD, they are coming, they grab power, we are going to, they've, dehumanized us. So you have one group of people that is even working, that is not saying no to the state. A people that is silent about, these state policies and whatever. A people that is not questioning the state. Why should you ask us to exterminate these people? Why don't we have people demonstrating? So there is a level of an individual participation or involvement, but there is the individual, as people, as a group, as a community. There is, people should be able to act. I do feel that people in their communities acted in solidarity to say no to leaders. Possibly some people could have survived. So possibly in some places, genocide did not have taken place to the extent that it did. Mm-hmm. So there is a moral obligation on a level of a group. We cannot just start singling out of maybe 6 or 8 million and say every person. But there is group participation. So this is why we say no, all men, let's go and kill. Why don't at least 50 of us say no? Let's take a minute. But the moment they say let's go and rape, so you start folding your shirt and you just come naked and you grab a woman, everyone. So I do think we cannot just deal with. I think we should partly deal with individuals, but we should also look at the perpetration of this crime as a group, as a crime that is perpetrated also by a group, because usually there's incitement. So you have a lot of people. There's incitement to commit genocide. There's incitement to perpetrate these crimes. So I do feel that there is a lot of that goes with a group of people than with individuals as in a community. So thank you so much for coming.